Hi everyone. So this week's Parsha, this week's Torah portion is Beshalach, and it's the Torah portion where the Jewish people are actually leaving Egypt. So they leave Egypt, they leave in a hurry, and then all of a sudden God tells Moshe to tell the Jewish people that they should turn back, they should return in the direction of where they came, towards a place called Pei HaCherot. So why should they suddenly turn back? Why should they suddenly turn around after leaving hastily? And God explains that it's because then Paro will think that the Jewish people have gotten lost, that they're lost in the wilderness, that they're not sure where they're going, and God is going to re-harden Paro's heart after many times hardening his heart to not let the Jewish people go. Now again, after Paro has sent the Jewish people away, again, Paro's heart will be hardened, and he's going to want to pursue the Jewish people. He thinks now they're getting lost in the desert, and he's gonna send his army out to pursue them. And then God will show his ultimate greatness to the Egyptians who are pursuing the people. And we might wonder why that's necessary after we've already had 10 plagues, and so the Egyptians have already been shown God's power in numerous ways. We've already seen God's power over nature. And so you might wonder what's left, and especially because Paro, whose heart is getting hardened and rehardened, and God says himself that he's hardening Paro's heart. So if his heart is getting hardened, then isn't he just going to be able to deny all over again whatever it is that he sees? What is there left to be shown, and what's the point of showing it if Paro's heart is hardened in any case, or who are we really showing it to? And the Sfat Emet, the Hasidic commentary from the 19th century, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Alter, he explains about these verses that, first of all, it's really for the good of the Jewish people. It's not really for the Egyptians. It's the Jewish people who need to learn something from this experience. That apparently there's still something that was stuck in exile, or still something that was stuck in Paro's domain that needed to be freed in order for the Jewish people to truly be freed. And what is that something? So the way the Sfat Emet explains the verse where God tells the Jewish people that they should return, vayeshuvu, they should return to a place called Pei HaCherot. He says that they're returning, that really there's a return here. It's an internal return. It's not just about where they're turning back to on a physical spatial plane. It's a kind of internal return to a root inside them that's above nature. They're supposed to find an inner place inside themselves, whose root is above nature, and that place is the place where true freedom lies. So he connects the name of this place, Cherot, Pei HaCherot, to the word in Hebrew for freedom, which is cherut. Freedom is cherut. And so the idea is that that's where true freedom lies. True freedom doesn't lie in the realm of the natural world. True freedom lies in a place that's above nature, and the Jewish people apparently haven't really connected to that yet. They haven't connected to their true freedom, even though they've now left Egypt. But they don't know yet that they have a kind of true freedom that they can only access if they really step inside themselves and find a certain root, a certain place inside themselves that's sourced above nature, where their true freedom lies. So what is this about? What is this freedom, and how do they come to see that they have it? I think there's a kind of play in this whole story of leaving Egypt and then coming to cross the Red Sea. There's a kind of there's some kind of puzzles here that have to do with free will. First, we notice that Paro's heart is getting hardened all the time in not allowing the Jews to leave Egypt in the first place, and now in following them, So there's a kind of connection between Paro and a lack of free will. He maybe at some points he makes that decision by himself, but then God is hardening his heart to not even for it to not really be an option for him to let the Jewish people go. His resistance is coming from something that's already imposed on him. So Paro is connected to a lack of free will, and there's a way in which maybe the Jewish people here, even though physically they've already started to leave Egypt, perhaps they're kind of still stuck in a place of not really knowing that they have a certain kind of freedom. They might be free it's the very beginning of their freedom physically, but they might not yet know what kind of freedom they have internally. And in general, the question of free will, there's a kind of paradox about it, because it's not even clear what it means to have real free will, right? Because on the one hand, if we ask about a decision, whether it's explained by the things that came before it, by different causes, by a person's personality and circumstances and habits and things that already came before a certain decision is made, or by things that are happening in the brain. So we think this is a kind of classic philosophical puzzle about free will. If there's an explanation, whether it's in terms of things that are happening in the brain or causes of things that happen in a person's life, a person's personality, things that happened before, everything that happened that brought a person to a moment of decision, if all of those things can explain a person's decision, if we can say that they decided to do A rather than B because of their personality, because the brain fired in this way rather than that way, because they were raised in this way rather than that way, because these are their habits, because these are the values that they had yesterday. Any explanation like that, it seems to undermine the idea of free will, because if a decision is fully explained and is in principle predictable based on what came before, then it's not really free. It's a kind of deterministic picture of our decisions, even if they feel free. If they can be explained by our personalities and our background and our circumstances, then there's a sense in which they're not really free in the way that we want our decisions to be free. And on the other hand, if they can't be explained, it seems, if we kind of think about it just using our kind of ordinary reason, it seems like the only alternative to that kind of decision, to a decision that's explained by the previous circumstances, the alternative seems like randomness. Like, okay, if I make a decision that's not based on anything that came before, that's not based on my personality, that's not based on my background, my history, then it seems like what's left is that the decision is random. It's like flipping a coin. And maybe there's room in nature for something like that. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics see a kind of indeterminism in reality, but that also doesn't seem like the kind of free will that we want to have. When I think that I have genuine free will, that I can really choose something for myself in a real way. It seems like it's the complete opposite of flipping a coin. I want to truly choose it, and I believe that I can truly choose it. And so it seems like there's this kind of paradox. It's not clear where we can even find space for free will in the natural world, in the logic of how it might be that our decisions are made. Either they're explained or they're unexplained. And if they're explained, then they're accounted for by previous circumstances, and if they're unexplained, it seems that they must be random and not coming from something. And so there's a kind of puzzle here, and I think there might be a hint here in this commentary and what's happening in the way that the Jewish people are leaving Egypt, and in the Sfat Emets commentary there might be a kind of hint here about how we might be able to rise above this puzzle. So we said Paro represents a kind of lack of free will, a kind of decision that's based on what already happened before. Perhaps Paro already decided once or multiple times to not let the Jewish people go, but after that, God is re-hardening his heart, is hardening his heart to not allow him to do something different. And that might be understood on a deeper level in terms of situations that once we put ourselves in a certain situation, it's very, very hard to do something different later. The situation itself reinforces a kind of outlook and a kind of future decision that's very hard to step out from. So that's Paro. And like I said, perhaps the Jewish people were kind of stuck in that kind of thinking, like they didn't know that they had genuine free will. And this is what the Sfat Emet talks about when he talks about the splitting of the sea. He says that at the moment of the splitting of the sea, there was something that was higher than just showing God's power over nature. It actually also showed the Jewish people's free will and their ability to rise above nature and actually have an effect on things. So rather than just being part of a kind of deterministic system, that once something is already, once a kind of history is already played out, as if there's nothing one can do to get out of it. No, the opposite. There's a kind of source that we have that's above nature, where we can access a place where we can make a real decision, and that decision can change reality. It can really affect things. And so what's the connection between this idea and the splitting of the sea? Why and how here are the Jewish people learning this lesson? This is what the Sfat Emet connects the splitting of the sea and this moment of Vayashuvu, that the Jewish people should return. They should return, not merely physically, but to this place in themselves of where genuine freedom is to be found. So what does that have to do with the splitting of the sea? How do we connect these pieces that we've brought up? I think when Paro, when the Egyptians with Paro are on Paro's command are actually pursuing the Jewish people, there's a certain point where the Jewish people, they feel stuck. They're on one side is the sea, and on the other side are the Egyptians pursuing them. And it's you might think in that kind of situation that it would be really easy to just be afraid and surrender and to say, okay, there's nothing we can do. There's no way we can go forward. And so we just have to go back. And before this moment, they even say to Moshe, why did you even take us out if we're going to be lost in the desert? Maybe we should go back. So they have these fears that come up, and so perhaps they feel that they might as well just surrender, or that they need to surrender. There's no other option. They think that they don't have a choice, that they need to go back to Egypt because otherwise they'll just die here. They don't have a way forward. But God tells Moshe is praying or screaming to God, and God tells him, why are you screaming? Tell the Jewish people to go forward. But how can they go forward when forward is the sea? How can they go forward? It seems like they have no choice. It seems like they're completely stuck and they have to surrender to Paro, to the Egyptians. What is Paro and the Egyptians? That represents a kind of deterministic perspective from which, okay, there's nothing we can do, and the circumstances are gonna determine for us what's gonna happen and what's gonna be with us, and even what decisions we're gonna make. And so there's a really, really, really strong temptation to surrender to that, to say, okay, there's nothing I can do. I don't really have free will here. There's no way that I can go forward. What does it mean to go forward? To go forward is to go straight. What's in front of me, what I really want to do, in some sense, is forward. Whereas going to the back, to the side, in a kind of different direction, that's where some kind of external pressure is sending me to. So here the Jewish people, they think that they can't go forward. They think that their only option is to go back and surrender to Paro, to the perspective that says that there's no genuine free will, that all of our decisions are ultimately determined, or all of our circumstances are determined in a way that leaves us powerless, a kind of enslavement to our circumstances, to something external from us. But then something happens. So there's a midrash, and also in the Talmud, the story is brought that one person, Nachshon ben Aminadav, was the brother-in-law of Aaron, was going to be the high priest. So he steps in to the sea before the sea is split. He has trust, and he knows that the Jewish people can go forward, and he steps into the sea. He walks forward, and then Moshe is is commanded to take his staff and split the Red Sea, and God splits the sea, and the Jewish people can walk forward. So there's this suggestion here that actually, if we have trust, if we're able to access that place inside of us, if we can go deep into a place inside of us where we can trust that we can always walk forward, we can always do what's right for us in the moment. There's always something that's right for us to do that isn't based on external pressures, that isn't bending to what somebody expects of us, what we think that somebody wants from us, what somebody seems to be forcing of us. There's always a way forward, and what that way forward is, what it looks like, is different in every situation. It's not always obvious, and sometimes maybe the way forward is only by it's only some kind of internal movement that we can do, and not an external movement. And sometimes it is an external movement. Whatever it is, it's what's right for us in that moment, and it's what isn't imposed on us from outside. It's something that is really the true right thing that we should be doing. That's walking forward. And if we trust that, even if it looks like there's a sea, there's a raging, stormy sea before us, it seems impossible to move forward, to walk forward. But if we trust that, actually, no, if this is forward, then I can go forward. And we take one step forward. We take one step in the direction of doing what's right for me in this moment, whatever that looks like, even if it's an internal thing, even if it's on the level of thought and not on the level of action. And perhaps on the level of action. But when I do that, then the sea can split for me. And that's God showing us that actually we have genuine free will, that there's a place that we can access that goes above the perspective of nature, the deterministic perspective, and also goes beyond the perspective that only sees the two options, that either things are determined, either they're fully explained by what came before, or they're random. We can step above that dichotomy and find a place where our decisions are free and real, and we can feel what that means if we go to a real inner place and think about, well, what is it? What's the right thing for me to do in this moment? It's a kind of inner experience that we can access. And so the Sfat Emet, is this commentary, is telling us that at the splitting of the sea, that the Jewish people needed to learn that. That's what God was showing us at the splitting of the sea, and He was showing us more than anybody else. Really, it was for the Jewish people to see that we have genuine free will, as opposed to what Paro represents, which is the kind of deterministic perspective from which everything is just determined based on what came before. The splitting of the sea is not just showing God's power, it's showing something much deeper. After God's power has already been shown, we also need to see our own power, our own will, and what we can do with it, and how we can be partners with God, how we can actually make a true decision, and things are going to change. God is going to split the sea for us based on a real decision to move forward in a way that's right for us in the moment. And that's not easy to do. I think in everyday life, a lot of times our decisions aren't really free. This isn't something that we do all the time. A lot of times we do things based on external pressures that aren't even necessarily outside of us. They might be real external pressures, or they might be projected external pressures, like the things that we think that people expect of us, or the things that we think we need to do in order to whatever it is we think we need to do. It's if we think that this is what we should be doing because of whatever social or other kind of obligations we think we have, it's a kind of external It's a kind of external motivation. And when we do things from those kinds of external pressures, then the decisions that we make aren't really free. There's pressures from this side and pressures from this side, and we kind of end up going with whatever pressures are feel the most, or are pressuring us the most in the relevant moment. And that's a lot of times can be explained based on our circumstances and our background and our history. But there are times when we can make a decision that's really free. And this, I think, this Torah portion, this commentary, this moment of leaving Egypt and the splitting of the sea and walking through the sea, walking forward into it, are a kind of reminder for us that actually maybe we can do it much more often than we realize, to really step into ourselves, to go back to a place, to kind of find a place within ourselves that's beyond nature, beyond any kind of external pressures, beyond, we can recognize that the pressures are there, that they might feel strong for us, that they might arouse fear in us, that we might feel like we need to surrender to them. But then we can notice that actually, even if they're there, and even if when we think we need to surrender, we can find our ground and ask ourselves, well, what's really in front of me? What's really the right thing for me to do in this moment? That's from an inner place and motivated internally, not because I think it's what somebody expects of me or wants of me, but because this is really the true thing that I need to be doing right now. It's what God wants of me, but actually on an internal plane, the experience isn't that it's a kind of external, I think this is what God wants from me, so I'm going to do it. That can also be a kind of externally based decision. It's an inner place. I find that this is my real will tells me that this is what I need to be doing now. I feel totally whole with the decision. I feel that this is where I need to go. That's the way that God's will manifests itself inside of us, not as an outer command, but as a kind of inner command that comes from us, that comes from my own seeing, my own will. And so we're reminded here that that's possible, that even when it looks like there's a stormy sea in front of us, we can start walking into it. We can take the next step that we know on a deep inner plane is the right step, and God will split the sea for us when we do that. So I wish us all that kind of return to inner clarity and to the true freedom that we really have, that a lot of times we find it really difficult to access. So I wish us all the reminder that it's there and to have true access to it. Thanks for listening.